Commander Jake Sullivan was having a normal Tuesday morning when everything went crazy. His coffee mug sat getting cold on his desk while he stared at a glowing message above his computer. The fancy royal symbol of the Andorian coalition spun slowly in the air, catching the fake sunlight coming through his office window. "This is either junk mail or my life is about to get really weird," he said to himself, reaching for the button to open the message. The symbol broke apart into streams of light that turned into an official letter. It had all that fancy government language that made his head hurt. But the signature at the bottom made him drop his coffee mug. His fingers went numb with shock. Queen Lyra of the Andorian Coalition. Ruler of 3 star systems. Keeper of ancient traditions. And a long time ago, the girl with the pointy ears who used to sneak cookies from the colony food store. Jake's brain did flip-flops as he tried to match this fancy title with his memories of a 12-year-old girl who could fix flying bikes with parts that shouldn't even work. That was 23 years ago on Haven's Edge, back when his biggest worry was whether Jenny Morrison would notice his new haircut, not whether space diplomacy might collapse. The message was short, which made it scarier. "Commander Sullivan, I hope you are doing well. I am using the ancient rite of memory about the promise you made in the 7th year of Haven's Edge colonial settlement, Earth year 2387. Please come to Sith Prime to keep the promise you made under Andorian sacred law. We will arrange transportation whenever works for you. I am still your childhood friend, Lyra." Jake stared at the message until his eyes hurt, then read it again. The rite of memory. He had heard whispers about it during his alien culture training. Something about promises you couldn't break and sacred duties that made human contracts look like crayon drawings. But surely they didn't mean that silly promise he made when they were kids? His door made a chiming sound and Lieutenant Maria Torres walked in with her usual pile of computer tablets. She had that look she got when she was pretending she hadn't been listening through the communication system. "Morning, sir. You look like you saw a ghost or got news that your ex-girlfriend declared war on the whole universe." "Worse," Jake said, pointing at the still glowing message. "My childhood friend wants me to marry her, and she's a queen now." Torres stopped shuffling her tablets. "Sir, with respect, I need way more information before I can understand that without my brain exploding." Jake leaned back in his chair, which made a squeaking noise. Another reminder that the Human Defense Corps didn't have much money for nice things. "Remember those stories I told you about growing up on Haven's Edge? The frontier colony where humans and Andorians tried to figure out if we could live together without starting another war? The one where you accidentally insulted the ambassador's daughter by asking if her ears could pick up radio signals? That's the one. Except I didn't just insult her. I also apparently asked her to marry me." Jake rubbed his head, feeling a headache starting that no amount of fake coffee could fix. "We were 12, Torres. 12. I had just figured out that girls didn't actually have germs, and she had helped me fix my hover bike with some impossible Andorian technology that shouldn't have worked but did. So naturally, being a brilliant preteen diplomat, I told her that when we grew up, I would marry her." Torres put down her tablets very carefully, like someone trying not to laugh. "And now she's holding you to it?" Apparently in Andorian culture, promises made during childhood are considered sacred. Something about pure young minds and cosmic forces that bind you forever. Jake stood up and started walking back and forth, which in his tiny office meant taking exactly 3 steps before turning around. "I thought it was just kid stuff, you know? Like promising to be best friends forever or swearing you'll never eat vegetables." "Sir, most people don't have to worry about their childhood promises involving space royalty." Jake stopped walking to stare out the window at the slowly spinning bulk of Defense Station Gamma. Ships came and went in neat patterns, their navigation lights blinking like the glowing flowers Lyra used to show him in the colony's plant gardens. She had explained how they talked through light patterns, how beauty and usefulness weren't separate things in Andorian thinking. He had been too young to understand the philosophy, but old enough to be impressed that someone his age could sound so smart. The thing is, Torres, she was actually my friend. My real friend, not because our parents made us play together or because the colony leaders thought it would be good for human-Andorian relations. She liked the same adventure movies I did, and she never made me feel stupid for not understanding her technology. Jake turned back to his assistant. And now I have to decide whether to keep a promise I made when I thought the height of being grown up was sharing a bag of fake chocolate chips, or possibly destroy whatever peace progress we've made with the coalition. Torres picked up one of her tablets and began scrolling through information. Sir, I hate to make your crisis worse, but Queen Lyra isn't just asking you to marry her. According to our intelligence reports, she's been facing challenges to her rule from the noble houses. They think she's too friendly to human interests. Of course they do, Jake said, falling back into his chair. Because nothing says diplomatic nightmare like childhood promises becoming space politics. The communication console chimed again, this time with a message from Fleet Command. Jake looked at Torres, who was already reaching for the button. Should I tell them you're currently unavailable due to an unexpected engagement? Just tell them I'm having coffee with Destiny, Jake said, watching as another official symbol appeared above his desk. And Torres, start researching Andorian wedding customs. I have a feeling I'm going to need all the help I can get. The diplomatic transport Harmony's Edge had all the charm of a flying hospital, complete with that weird smell of recycled air and nervous sweat that Jake was starting to associate with life-changing decisions. He had spent the 3-day trip to Sith Prime switching between reading old protocol manuals and staring out the window at the swirling colors of hyperspace, wondering if it was too late to fake his own death and become a water farmer on some backwater planet. First time visiting an Andorian world, Commander? Asked Captain Reeves, the transport pilot who had the disturbing habit of humming show tunes while flying through dimensional rifts. Fair warning, the gravity's about 15% lighter than Earth standard, so try not to bounce around like a hyperactive kangaroo when we dock. Jake looked up from his tablet, which showed a confusing array of Andorian social customs that seemed designed by someone who thought regular manners weren't complicated enough. Any other helpful advice? Like how to talk to a queen without accidentally declaring war or proposing to her entire court? Just remember, their ears aren't just for show. Andorians can hear sounds we can't, so they always know when you're lying. Makes card games really awkward. Reeves chuckled at his own joke while adjusting something on the control panel that sparked worryingly. Oh, and whatever you do, don't mention the great vegetable incident of 2395. The what now? Never mind. If you don't know about it, you're probably better off staying ignorant. Trust me on this one. The transport shook as they dropped out of hyperspace, and Jake's first look at Sith Prime made him understand why poets throughout the galaxy had run out of good words to describe it. The planet hung in space like a jewel that couldn't decide what color it wanted to be, with crystal towers reaching up from continents that seemed to shimmer between dimensions. Floating islands drifted through the atmosphere, connected by bridges of what looked like solid light, while space stations moved in patterns that probably made sense to someone who understood Andorian math. Welcome to the capital of the Coalition, Reeves said, starting their descent toward a landing pad that appeared to be carved from one massive crystal. Where the buildings break at least 3 laws of physics and the plumbing works better than anything we have back home. The landing was smooth enough that Jake only questioned his mortality twice, which he considered a personal record. As the transport's ramp lowered, he was greeted by a group that looked like they had stepped out of a diplomatic handbook titled How to Intimidate Humans Without Really Trying. The lead figure wore robes that changed color in the planet's triple sunlight and had the kind of pointed ears that made Jake nostalgic for simpler times when the most exotic thing about Lyra was her ability to fix machines by talking to them. "Commander Sullivan," the figure said in accented standard. "I am Court Advisor Vexter. Her Majesty awaits your presence in the Obsidian Throne Room. Though I should mention that she's currently in the middle of a heated debate about trade regulations with the Council of Houses. Something about mineral mining rights and whether humans understand the concept of sustainable harvesting." Jake followed Vexter through hallways that seemed to bend space in ways that made his inner ear file a formal complaint. The walls pulsed with glowing patterns that he was fairly certain were alive, and the floor felt like it was gently guiding his steps toward some predetermined destination. "Is she always this busy? Or did I pick a particularly bad time for a social call?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual while his nervous system processed the fact that he was walking through a building that was probably sentient. "Her Majesty has been dealing with increased pressure from the noble houses since she announced her intention to invoke the right of memory," Vexter replied, pausing at a doorway that opened without any visible mechanism. "Many of them consider her attachment to human customs and friendships to be a weakness that undermines traditional Andorian values. Duke Kazarek in particular has been quite vocal about the need for more conservative leadership." The Obsidian Throne Room lived up to its name in ways that made Jake feel like he was stepping into the heart of a volcano that had decided to become architecturally ambitious. The ceiling arched impossibly high, covered in what looked like stars but were probably some sort of advanced lighting system, while the walls were carved from black stone that reflected images of distant worlds and civilizations. And there, sitting on a throne that seemed to be growing out of the floor itself, was Lyra. 23 years had transformed the awkward girl with the oversized ears into someone who radiated authority like a small sun. But Jake still recognized the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, and the slight smile that appeared when she was trying not to laugh at something ridiculous. Her ears, once a source of childhood teasing, now framed a face that carried the weight of ruling millions with a grace that made his dress uniform feel like he had borrowed it from someone more important. "Jake Sullivan," she said, rising from the throne with fluid motion that suggested she had extensive training in making everything look effortless. "You look exactly like I remembered, except taller and significantly more terrified." "Your Majesty," Jake began, attempting something that might charitably be called a bow. "I have to admit, when I imagined this reunion, it involved fewer thrones and more awkward small talk about what we had been up to for the past 2 decades. Lyra's laugh echoed through the chamber, and Jake felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "The throne is just furniture, Jake. Impressive furniture that's probably listening to everything we say and reporting back to the Council of Houses, but still just furniture." She gestured for him to come closer, and he noticed that her movements carried the same careful precision she had used when fixing his hover bike all those years ago. "I suppose you have questions about the right of memory and why I'm suddenly calling in childhood promises like they're legal documents?" The thought had crossed my mind, along with several others involving words I can't repeat in polite company. Jake walked closer, noting that the throne room was designed to make visitors feel insignificant, but somehow Lyra's presence made the space feel more intimate. "I have to ask, Lyra, do I still call you Lyra? Are you doing this because you actually want to marry me, or because you need a human husband for political reasons?" "Both," she said without hesitation, and Jake appreciated that she didn't try to sugarcoat the complexity of their situation. "The noble houses are using my friendship with humanity as evidence that I'm unfit to rule. They claim that our trade agreements and cultural exchanges are diluting pure Andorian traditions. Meanwhile, there are rumors that certain human corporations are funding opposition groups, hoping to destabilize the coalition and renegotiate our mineral rights." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the throne room's temperature. "And marrying me would solve this how exactly?" "The right of memory grants joint authority over strategic decisions to both parties. If you accept, you would have legal standing in Andorian law and shared control over the hyperspace corridors that connect our territories. Lyra stepped closer, and Jake caught a hint of the same floral scent she had worn as a child, though now it seemed more complex, layered with responsibilities and secrets. Any coup attempt against me would automatically become an act of war against humanity. It's elegant, really, in a way that would make our old diplomacy teachers proud. So I would be a political chess piece with a fancy title and ceremonial duties? You would be my partner, Lyra said simply. In every sense that matters. The boy who promised to marry me grew up to be someone I choose to marry anyway, assuming he's willing to help me save two civilizations from their own stupidity. Jake's quarters in the royal wing came with amenities he hadn't known existed, including a bathroom that somehow anticipated his needs and a bed that adjusted its firmness based on his stress levels. Currently, the mattress felt like it was trying to swallow him whole, which seemed appropriate given that he was drowning in Andorian etiquette lessons that made quantum physics look straightforward. No, Commander, Vexter said with the patience of someone who had clearly explained this 17 times already. When greeting members of the Fifth House, you bow at precisely 37 degrees while keeping your left hand visible, but your right hand hidden. It signifies respect without submission and acknowledges their traditional role as mediators in inter-house disputes. Jake tried the bow again, wobbling slightly as he calculated angles. And if I get it wrong? Best case scenario, they think you're charmingly ignorant. Worst case, you accidentally challenge Duke Kazarek to ritual combat. Vexter adjusted Jake's posture with the resigned air of someone who had been tasked with teaching a particularly slow child to navigate a minefield. Given that he's approximately twice your size and has been training in Andorian martial arts since he could walk, I'd recommend getting it right. Fantastic. Any other ways I might accidentally start a war before breakfast? Jake straightened up, noting that the mirrors in his quarters seemed to be offering helpful suggestions by highlighting his posture mistakes with subtle color changes. Well, there's the incident with the ceremonial fruit arrangement yesterday. Apparently, you created what roughly translates to your mother smells like fermented root vegetables in classical Andorian flower language. Vexter consulted his data tablet, which projected holographic notes in flowing script. The kitchen staff found it amusing, but I'd avoid similar creativity in the future. Jake slumped into a chair that immediately began massaging his shoulders. I'm starting to think my childhood promise was the universe's way of getting revenge for every time I complained about being bored. The door chimed with a sequence of tones that Jake had learned meant urgent but not quite emergency level. Vexter activated the communication panel, revealing Lieutenant Torres's face floating in the air with an expression that suggested she had discovered something unpleasant. Sir, I've been analyzing those intelligence reports you requested about the noble houses and their recent activities, Torres said, her image flickering slightly due to quantum encryption. You're not going to like what I found. Duke Kazarek has been meeting secretly with representatives from Meridian Corporation over the past 6 months. The meetings are coded as cultural exchanges, but our financial intelligence suggests they're discussing something considerably more lucrative than art appreciation. Jake leaned forward, suddenly feeling more alert than he had since arriving on Sith Prime. What kind of lucrative? The kind that involves military-grade sensor scramblers, shipments of rare earth elements, and enough encrypted communications to make a paranoid AI nervous. Torres paused to consult her own data. Meridian has been trying to renegotiate their mining contracts with the Coalition for years. If the current government fell and was replaced by someone more amenable to their interests, they'd make enough profit to buy their own solar system, Jake finished. And all they'd need to do is destabilize Lyra's rule and install a puppet regime. Vexter's expression shifted from patient tutor to concerned advisor. Commander, if what your lieutenant suggests is accurate, then the noble houses aren't simply opposing the Queen's policies out of tradition. They're being manipulated by your own people. Jake felt his stomach perform the kind of gymnastics usually reserved for faulty artificial gravity. Torres, dig deeper into Meridian's connections. I want to know everyone they've been talking to, what they've been promising, and how long this has been going on. And send a coded message to Fleet Intelligence. Tell them we might have a corporate conspiracy that's gone way beyond simple profiteering. Already on it, sir. I've also taken the liberty of scanning communications traffic from the palace. You might want to know that someone's been monitoring your quarters and your training sessions with Advisor Vexter. Jake looked around his room with new appreciation for the helpful mirrors and anticipatory furniture. Are we talking about normal palace security, or the kind of monitoring that suggests someone's planning to use my spectacular failures at flower arranging as evidence that humans are culturally inferior? The latter, I'm afraid, Vexter said, activating a small device that caused the room's ambient lighting to shift to a warmer tone. I've just activated privacy shielding that should prevent casual surveillance, but we must assume that your activities are being studied by those who oppose the right of memory. Torres's image leaned closer to the communication pickup. Sir, there's something else. Queen Lyra has been receiving what appear to be routine maintenance updates on palace systems, but the timing suggests they're actually status reports on your adaptation to Andorian customs. Someone's tracking your progress with uncomfortably precise detail. Let me guess, Jake said, standing up and beginning to pace in the small area the privacy shield allowed. If I fail to demonstrate proper cultural understanding before the rite of memory ceremony, it gives the noble houses grounds to argue that the marriage would be invalid under traditional law? Worse than that, Vexter said grimly. Ancient law requires that both parties demonstrate not just understanding, but mastery of each other's customs. You're learning our ways, but Queen Lyra would also need to prove her knowledge of human traditions and values. If either of you fails... Jake stopped pacing as the implications hit him. The ceremony becomes void, Lyra loses political legitimacy, and the coalition falls apart just in time for Meridian Corporation to swoop in and renegotiate everything in their favor. The door chimed again, this time with the urgent pattern that meant someone very important wanted immediate attention. Vexter deactivated the privacy shield and opened the door to reveal Lyra herself, wearing what Jake had learned was her "I'm trying to look casual while dealing with a crisis" expression. Jake, we need to talk, she said, glancing at Torres's image and Vexter's concerned face. The Council of Houses has just announced that they're invoking the trial of worthiness. Both of us have exactly 7 days to demonstrate complete mastery of each other's cultural traditions, or the right of memory will be declared null and void. Jake felt the chair's massage function increase in intensity, as if it sensed his rising stress levels. 7 days to become an expert in Andorian customs while you figure out how to be human enough to satisfy their requirements? 7 days to save both our peoples from a war that's being orchestrated by people who see profit in chaos, Lyra corrected. The good news is that I've been studying human culture for years, ever since I became queen. The bad news is that Duke Kazarek has just announced his intention to serve as the house's primary observer during your trials. The same Duke Kazarek who's been having cozy chats with Meridian Corporation? Jake asked. Lyra's ears twitched in surprise. How did you? Never mind, I should have known you'd figure it out. Yes, the same one. Which means we're not just dealing with cultural examinations. We're dealing with sabotage, political manipulation, and the kind of high-stakes theater that makes ancient gladiatorial contests look like children's games. Jake looked around the room at the faces of his allies, human, Andorian, and holographic, and realized that his childhood promise had somehow become the linchpin holding two civilizations together. "Well," he said, attempting a grin that felt only slightly forced, "at least nobody can say my life is boring anymore." The Festival of Twin Moons had turned Sith Prime into a carnival of light and sound that made Jake's childhood memories of colony celebrations look like quiet tea parties. Glowing decorations pulsed in rhythm with traditional Andorian music while orbital platforms projected holographic displays across the night sky. It would have been beautiful if Jake hadn't known that somewhere in the celebrating crowds, Duke Kazaric supporters were preparing to tear down everything Lyra had built. "Nervous?" Lyra asked, adjusting the ceremonial robes that made Jake feel like he was playing dress-up as someone much more important than himself. They stood in the waiting room of the Great Temple, waiting for the signal that would begin either their triumph or the spectacular collapse of interstellar diplomacy. Terrified, Jake admitted, checking his wrist communicator one more time. But the good kind of terrified, like when you're about to jump out of a perfectly good spacecraft and hope your anti-gravity unit works. Lyra laughed, the sound echoing off crystal walls that hummed with harmonic frequencies. "In 7 days, you've mastered Andorian cultural protocols that take most diplomats years to learn. You've also uncovered a conspiracy that could have destroyed both our peoples. I think you're allowed to be a little nervous." The past week had been a blur of intensive cultural training, interrupted by increasingly frantic intelligence gathering. Jake had learned to distinguish between 17 different types of ceremonial bows, while Torres and Vexter compiled evidence of Meridian Corporation's involvement with the noble houses. The evidence was damning. Encrypted communications, financial transfers, and weapons shipments all pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan to destabilize the coalition and install a more compliant government. "Speaking of conspiracies," Jake said, "are you sure broadcasting all that evidence during the ceremony won't cause a diplomatic incident that makes our current problems look simple?" "Jake, they're planning to overthrow my government and probably assassinate both of us if the right of memory fails. I think we're past worrying about diplomatic niceties." Lyra's ears twitched with amusement. "Besides, there's something poetic about exposing traitors during a ceremony that's supposed to symbolize the union of our peoples." The temple doors began to glow with the warm light that signaled the beginning of the ceremony. Jake could hear the crowd gathering outside, thousands of Andorians and humans who had come to witness either a historic alliance or its spectacular failure. "No pressure at all," Jake muttered. They entered the great temple together, and Jake was struck by how the ancient architecture seemed to pulse with life. The walls were covered with murals that told the story of Andorian civilization, while the ceiling opened to reveal the twin moons hanging like jewels in the purple sky. Representatives from both species filled the ceremonial space, their faces reflecting mixtures of hope, skepticism, and barely concealed political calculation. Duke Kazaric stood among the noble house's delegation, his expression suggesting he was already planning his victory speech. Jake caught the Duke's eye and offered a smile that was probably too cheerful for someone about to undergo cultural trials that could determine the fate of two worlds. "Citizens of the Coalition and honored guests from Earth," Lyra began, her voice carrying clearly through the temple's acoustic systems. "We gather tonight to witness the fulfillment of ancient promises and the forging of new bonds between our peoples." The ceremony began with traditional elements that Jake had memorized during his crash course in Andorian customs. He performed the ritual greetings, spoke the ceremonial phrases, and managed not to accidentally insult anyone's ancestors. So far, so good. But as they reached the central portion of the ceremony, the moment when both parties would demonstrate their mastery of each other's cultures, Jake activated his wrist communicator and sent the signal he had been preparing all week. "Before we continue," he said, his voice projected by the temple's systems, "I believe it's important that all witnesses understand the full context of tonight's ceremony. Lieutenant Torres, please proceed with the intelligence briefing." Torres's holographic image materialized above the ceremonial altar, causing gasps and murmurs from the crowd. Citizens of both worlds, she began, over the past 6 months, Meridian Corporation has been secretly funding opposition to Queen Lyra's rule. They have provided weapons, intelligence, and financial support to noble houses planning to overthrow the legitimate government of the Andorian coalition. The evidence unfolded in holographic displays that showed financial transfers, recorded communications, and shipping manifests. Jake watched Duke Kazarek's face as the Duke realized that his private conversations with Meridian representatives were being broadcast to the entire ceremony. The goal, Torres continued, was to destabilize the coalition, install a puppet government, and renegotiate mining rights to benefit human corporate interests at the expense of both our peoples. The crowd's reaction was immediate and loud. Andorian voices rose in anger while human representatives demanded explanations. In the chaos, Jake noticed several figures moving toward the exits, Duke Kazarek supporters attempting to flee before security forces could detain them. The irony, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the noise, is that those who claimed my friendship with humanity made me unfit to rule were themselves being manipulated by humans who saw our people as nothing more than resources to exploit. Jake stepped forward, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes upon him. I came here expecting to fulfill a childhood promise, and I discovered that the girl I made that promise to had grown into someone worth making new promises to. Not because she's a queen, but because she's someone who puts the welfare of her people above personal gain. The ceremony continued, but now it felt different. What had begun as a political necessity transformed into something genuine. Jake found himself speaking the traditional vows with conviction, meaning every word about partnership, shared responsibilities, and mutual respect. When Lyra accepted the right of memory and formally named him as her consort, Jake felt the legal and political weight of their union settling around them like a protective shield. Any remaining coup plotters would now be challenging not just an Andorian queen, but a joint human Andorian authority backed by both governments. As the twin moons reached their highest point, Jake and Lyra stood together before their peoples, hands joined in the traditional gesture that symbolized the interweaving of destinies. The ceremonial crowd had become a celebration, with even former skeptics acknowledging that they had witnessed something historically significant. So, Jake said quietly as they walked through the crowd receiving congratulations, "What's it like being married to someone who used to tease you about your ears?" "Oddly familiar," Lyra replied, squeezing his hand. "What's it like being married to someone who can have you executed for treason if you don't take out the garbage?" "Motivating," Jake said, then paused. "We're talking about metaphorical garbage, right?" Lyra's laugh was answer enough. Later, as they stood on the palace balcony watching the celebration continue in the streets below, Jake reflected on how keeping a childhood promise had somehow become the most adult thing he had ever done. The scared kid who had worried about diplomatic incidents had been replaced by someone willing to risk everything for people he cared about. "No regrets?" Lyra asked, following his gaze to where human and Andorian children played together in the festival lights. "Just one," Jake said, pulling her closer. "I wish it hadn't taken us 23 years to figure out that some promises are worth keeping." As the twin moons set over Sith Prime, casting their combined light over a celebration that marked the beginning of a new era, Jake Sullivan realized that sometimes the universe had a funny way of making sure you ended up exactly where you belonged. Even if it took a childhood promise, a galactic conspiracy, and the most complicated wedding in interstellar history to get you there.